On a bright Monday morning, Marcus Taylor walked into the sleek downtown office of Madison Global, his heart full of hope. The company's reputation as a leader in tech innovation was legendary, and Marcus, a highly skilled software engineer, had fought hard for a position on their elite development team. But what should have been a promising step forward in his career quickly turned into a nightmare. It began subtly. A casual comment from his manager about Marcus fitting the diversity quota at the company made the room awkwardly silent. Marcus, unwilling to make waves, brushed it off as ignorance rather than malice. But the comments didn't stop. Over time, they became sharper and more deliberate. His colleagues would snicker at stereotypical jokes about black culture during team meetings, while his manager, Mr. Clayton, made it a habit of questioning Marcus's qualifications in front of clients. One morning, Marcus arrived at his desk to find a cartoon taped to his monitor. A crude, racially charged image that sent a clear message. "You don't belong here." He felt a lump rise in his throat, but still, he said nothing. After all, Marcus was raised to believe that hard work and resilience could conquer any adversity. But things escalated during a high-stakes client presentation. Despite Marcus leading the development of the project, Mr. Clayton deliberately excluded him from speaking. Instead, he handed the credit to Marcus's less experienced white colleague. Marcus sat in stunned silence as the client showered praise on someone else for his hard work. Later that day, Marcus confronted Mr. Clayton in private. "I developed that entire framework. I deserve the chance to present it," he said, his voice steady but filled with frustration. Mr. Clayton's response was cold and dismissive. "Look, Marcus, you're lucky to even be here. Maybe tone down the attitude." It was a moment of humiliation that Marcus would never forget. He realized that staying silent was no longer an option. The decision to fight back didn't come easily. Marcus knew the risks: reputational damage, potential blacklisting in the industry, and the emotional toll of standing up against a powerful corporation. But he couldn't let this continue. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about challenging a system that allowed racism to thrive unchecked. Gathering his resolve, Marcus began documenting every instance of discrimination. He saved emails, recorded conversations where legally permissible, and reached out to trusted colleagues who had witnessed the treatment he endured. Slowly, he built a case that would expose the toxic culture at Madison Global. Meanwhile, whispers of his decision to take legal action began circulating around the office. Some colleagues distanced themselves, fearing retaliation, but a few stood by Marcus, offering their support and courageously agreeing to testify on his behalf. The stakes were high, but Marcus knew that silence was complicity. By filing a lawsuit against Madison Global and Mr. Clayton, he hoped not only to seek justice for himself, but also to send a message to countless others enduring similar treatment in silence. As the case gained media attention, discussions about workplace discrimination became unavoidable. People were forced to confront the uncomfortable truths about biases that persisted even in so-called progressive industries. But what would happen next? Would Marcus's bravery be enough to bring the truth to light? Or would the powerful forces arrayed against him crush his resolve? One thing was certain: this fight was far from over, and the revelations yet to come would shake the foundations of Madison Global. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal teams, and a few silent onlookers whose faces reflected curiosity and outrage. Marcus sat beside his attorney, Ms. Evelyn Harper, a fierce civil rights litigator with a reputation for taking on powerful corporations. Her calm yet commanding demeanor was a source of reassurance for Marcus, who still couldn't shake the nerves twisting in his stomach. Across the room, Mr. Clayton lounged with smug confidence, flanked by a high-priced legal team hired by Madison Global. To him, this was just another frivolous complaint, a minor inconvenience that would be swept under the rug like countless other cases. The court proceedings began with opening statements, and Evelyn wasted no time setting the tone. "This is a case about dignity, accountability, and justice," she declared. Marcus Taylor, a highly qualified and dedicated employee, was subjected to a hostile work environment fueled by racial discrimination. Today, we will present evidence that not only reveals the truth, but also holds Madison Global accountable for its failure to act. The room was silent as Evelyn outlined the key points of their case: documented instances of harassment, witnesses willing to testify, and the devastating emotional toll it had taken on Marcus. As the first witnesses were called, the depth of the discrimination became painfully clear. A former colleague of Marcus, hesitant but determined, described witnessing Mr. Clayton's blatant favoritism toward white employees. It was obvious, she admitted. Marcus did the heavy lifting, but Mr. Clayton always made sure someone else got the credit. Emails were presented as evidence, containing thinly veiled insults directed at Marcus. One particular email from Mr. Clayton read, "We need to rethink keeping Marcus on this project. He doesn't fit our company image." Marcus's hands clenched under the table as he listened. The humiliation he'd once internalized was now laid bare for everyone to see. But the defense wasn't going down without a fight. Madison Global's attorney attempted to frame Marcus as a disgruntled employee who had misunderstood office dynamics. They suggested that any exclusion or oversight was purely coincidental, not a reflection of racism. Evelyn was relentless in her cross-examination. "So you're saying it's a coincidence that Mr. Taylor, the only black employee on the development team, was consistently passed over for opportunities and subjected to derogatory comments?" she pressed. The defense faltered. "We have no evidence to suggest intentional discrimination," they stammered. But Evelyn had plenty of evidence. The turning point came when a brave whistleblower, still employed at Madison Global, took the stand. "There was a culture of subtle but persistent racism," she confessed. "People were afraid to speak up because they didn't want to lose their jobs. But Marcus's treatment was the worst. Everyone saw it, but no one did anything." Her testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Journalists furiously typed notes, capturing every damning word. As the day wore on, Marcus's resolve only grew stronger. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about reclaiming his dignity and challenging a system that thrived on silence. But the fight was far from over. The defense hinted at a strategy designed to discredit Marcus personally, digging into his past and professional record. Evelyn warned him about the coming storm, but Marcus stood firm. "Let them try," he said, determination flashing in his eyes. By the end of the day, the truth was beginning to surface. The carefully constructed image of Madison Global as a forward-thinking, inclusive company was crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. But there were still battles to be fought, and Marcus knew that the road to justice was never easy. What would come next would test his resilience like never before. The courtroom revelations were only the tip of the iceberg. Outside those polished wooden walls, a deeper investigation was underway, led by Evelyn's legal team. They had hired private investigators, combed through Madison Global's records, and interviewed former employees who had quietly exited the company to escape its toxic culture. One chilly evening, Evelyn invited Marcus to her office to review their findings. The room smelled faintly of fresh coffee, and the walls were lined with legal books and framed victories from previous cases. She spread out a series of documents on the large oak table. "We've hit a gold mine, Marcus," she said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Take a look at this." Marcus leaned forward, scanning the papers. His eyes widened as he recognized the email chain. "These are internal communications from the leadership team," Evelyn explained. "Here, Mr. Clayton explicitly states that diversity hires are a burden to the company's image." Marcus felt a wave of anger and vindication wash over him. "They put that in writing?" he asked incredulously. Evelyn nodded grimly. "It's worse than we thought. We've also found patterns in promotion records that show clear racial bias. White employees with less experience were consistently promoted over their black and minority counterparts. And it gets better. Clayton was reprimanded for similar behavior at a previous job but managed to cover it up. The pieces were coming together, but they needed more. Evelyn knew that corporate giants like Madison Global didn't go down without a fight. "We need one more key witness," she said. "Someone from upper management who can confirm that this wasn't just Clayton acting on his own. This was systemic." Days turned into weeks as the search intensified. Marcus began to feel the weight of the fight pressing down on him. The media scrutiny, the whispers from former colleagues, and the constant battle to maintain his composure all took their toll. But giving up was never an option. Then came the breakthrough. A former senior executive, Mr. Harris, reached out anonymously through Evelyn's secure tip line. "I can't stay silent anymore," His message read, "I saw too much." Meeting in a discreet location, Harris revealed what Marcus and Evelyn had long suspected. The culture at Madison Global was rotten from the top down, he admitted. Clayton was just the enforcer. The higher-ups knew exactly what was going on, but they turned a blind eye because Clayton delivered results. Harris agreed to testify, knowing it would likely end his career in the industry. His courage bolstered Marcus's resolve. The courtroom became the stage for these explosive revelations. Harris's testimony was damning. He described boardroom conversations where executives casually dismissed diversity initiatives as unnecessary pandering and openly supported Clayton's discriminatory practices. When presented with the incriminating emails and promotion records, the defense struggled to maintain their narrative of innocence. The judge's furrowed brow indicated that the evidence was not going unnoticed. Still, there were moments of doubt. The defense launched a personal attack on Marcus, suggesting that he had been a difficult employee prone to exaggeration. They paraded minor mistakes he'd made during his tenure as evidence of his incompetence. But Evelyn was ready. Mr. Taylor's performance reviews were exemplary until he began challenging the status quo, she countered. It's clear that the attempts to discredit him are nothing more than a smokescreen to hide the truth. The turning point came when a forensic expert presented a detailed analysis of the company's communication patterns. There is a statistically significant correlation between race and promotion decisions at Madison Global, the expert testified. The data speaks for itself. By the end of the session, the tide had unmistakably turned in Marcus's favor. The investigation had unearthed the truth, and there was no putting it back into the shadows. As Marcus walked out of the courtroom that day, the cold air biting at his face, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, victory felt possible. The courtroom was charged with anticipation as Evelyn stood to deliver her final argument. The tension in the air was palpable. This was the culmination of weeks of intense testimony, revelations, and evidence that had left Madison Global reeling. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Evelyn began, her voice steady and confident, "you have heard the testimonies. You've seen the evidence. Marcus Taylor is not just a man seeking justice for himself. He represents countless individuals who have endured discrimination and silence in corporate environments that claim to be inclusive but fail miserably when it comes to their actions." She gestured toward the evidence board, where damning emails and promotion statistics were displayed. The evidence is undeniable. What happened to Marcus Taylor was not an isolated incident. It was part of a systemic problem, a culture fostered by Madison Global and executed by individuals like Mr. Clayton. The defense tried one last desperate maneuver, arguing that Marcus had exaggerated his experiences and that Madison Global had already implemented diversity training initiatives. But the jury had heard enough. After hours of deliberation, the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. Marcus held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "We find the defendant, Madison Global, guilty of creating a hostile work environment and engaging in discriminatory practices," the foreperson announced. "We also hold Mr. Clayton personally accountable for his role in perpetuating these actions." A wave of relief and vindication washed over Marcus. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Marcus felt Evelyn's reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. But this victory was only the beginning. The verdict sent shockwaves through the corporate world. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a landmark case in the fight against workplace discrimination. Social media lit up with hashtags supporting Marcus, and employees from various industries began sharing their own stories of bias and discrimination. Madison Global's board of directors swiftly announced the termination of Mr. Clayton and pledged to overhaul their corporate culture. They brought in external consultants to conduct a comprehensive audit of their practices and implemented mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training for all employees. Marcus was approached by several companies eager to have him on their team, recognizing not only his professional talent but also his courage. But he had a different path in mind. Rather than returning to corporate life, Marcus founded an organization dedicated to helping marginalized employees navigate workplace discrimination. "No one should have to fight this battle alone," he said during a televised interview. We need to hold companies accountable and empower individuals to speak up. Evelyn continued to work with Marcus, now serving as a legal advisor for his organization. Together, they helped countless individuals bring their cases to light, creating a ripple effect that forced companies to rethink their policies and practices. Marcus's journey had transformed him. The man who once sat in silent humiliation had become a powerful advocate for justice and change. He spoke at conferences, authored a best-selling book on corporate accountability, and became a mentor to young professionals navigating their careers. One evening, as Marcus walked through the bustling streets of downtown, he passed by Madison Global's headquarters. The company's name gleamed on the glass facade, but it was now synonymous with reform and accountability rather than exclusion. He smiled faintly, knowing that the fight had been worth it. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a transformation had taken place, both within Marcus and the corporate world at large. Years had passed since the courtroom victory that changed Marcus Taylor's life and career forever. Yet, the echoes of that pivotal moment continued to resonate far beyond the polished floors of Madison Global's offices. The case had become a symbol of resilience, justice, and corporate accountability, a case study taught in law schools and discussed in leadership workshops. Sitting in his modest yet bustling office, Marcus looked around at the vibrant energy of his team. His organization, Equal Pathways, had grown into a national movement offering legal support, mentorship, and advocacy for employees facing discrimination. The walls were adorned with framed photographs of smiling individuals who had found justice and empowerment through his organization. Marcus leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. What had started as a fight for his own dignity had blossomed into a movement that was changing the corporate landscape one case at a time. Madison Global, once notorious for its toxic culture, had undergone a dramatic transformation. After a thorough restructuring, the company had become a leader in diversity and inclusion initiatives. They now boasted one of the most diverse leadership teams in the industry, and their workplace satisfaction ratings had soared. Marcus had received a personal letter from the new CEO, thanking him for his courage and acknowledging the positive changes his lawsuit had sparked. Your bravery forced us to confront uncomfortable truths, and for that, we are eternally grateful, the letter read. Beyond Madison Global, other companies had taken notice. The case had set a precedent that emboldened employees to speak out and hold their employers accountable. Policies were rewritten, training programs were revamped, and diversity councils were established across various industries. Marcus's personal journey was equally transformative. The timid man who once hesitated to speak up had become a confident, eloquent leader. But the road hadn't been without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, exhaustion, and even fear. Yet, through it all, Marcus had learned the power of resilience and the importance of community. In one of his keynote speeches, Marcus shared a lesson that had become his guiding principle. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step we take matters. And together, we can build a world where dignity and respect are the norm, not the exception. One afternoon, Marcus received an email from a young engineer named Jada, who had watched his televised interview years ago and found inspiration in his story. Because of you, she wrote, I found the courage to stand up for myself. I just won my case against my employer, and I'm starting a new job where I feel valued and respected. Thank you for being a voice for people like me. Reading her words, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His fight had never been just about winning a lawsuit. It had been about creating a legacy of hope and empowerment. Walking through a park near his office, Marcus watched children play and families gather on picnic blankets. The world had changed, and while there was still much work to be done, progress was undeniable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had been worth every struggle. Turning toward the future, he knew that his work was far from over. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, knowing that he had made a difference.